So welcome everybody this evening to this webinar and about what does a Master of the Bench do. I'm just going to introduce myself, and we've got some speakers this evening who will tell you about their own experiences of being a bencher of the Inner Temple. I'm the current reader of the Inner Temple. Prior to that, I was involved in the Education and Training Committee, Scholarships Committee, the Executive Committee, and also I've been the co-convener of the Temple Women's Forum for a number of years, all events which benchers can become involved in. So this evening, before we move on to our speakers, I'm just going to give you an outline as to the way the Inn works and what the principal officers do firstly. So as I say, I'm currently the reader, who's one of the principal officers of the Inn. The three principal officers are the treasurer, the reader, and the reader-elect. And the treasurer is like the executive chairman. The recommendation for treasurer is made on by the treasurer nomination committee, and then a recommendation is made by executive committee with the decision finally being put to bench table. And what the treasurer does is to set the direction on strategic issues facing the students, the members, and the bar more widely, presides at bench tables and at executive committee, and is an ex officio member of all committees and subcommittees of the bench. Also, the treasurer is an ambassador for the Inn, both domestically and also abroad. He's required to attend regular meetings, training sessions, and social events to understand the Inn's workings and to travel abroad to represent our interests and those of our members living and working abroad. The reader, that's me this year, is number 2 and assists the chairman and may take on some of the functions that the chairman would the treasurer, would normally undertake and under the treasurer's overall direction. And the reader-elect, number 3, is going to take over as reader the following year and also takes part in the general governance of the Inn. Usually, each of the principal officers hold office for a year and then they move on to the next stage. But because of the exceptional nature of the pandemic, all of the officers are holding their position for 2 years to provide continuity and to deal with the exceptional pressures that have been imposed by the pandemic. So this year's Master Treasurer is Guy Featherstone-Hall, and the reader-elect is Sir Robert Francis. So alongside the principal officers is the sub-treasurer, who's Greg Dere, who's with us this evening, and he is effectively the chief executive of the Inn, reports to the treasurer, and oversees a very large staff management team, the finance director, known as the collector, the director of properties, and other members of the management team. The overall remit of the sub-treasurer is the management and financial administration and forward planning of the Inn's affairs within the framework set down by bench table and executive committee. And he also liaises regularly with the chairman of committees and activities and the chairman of bar liaison. In addition to the day-to-day running of the Inn, the Inn's affairs include relationship with other legal entities such as the bar, the other Inns, the Council of the Inns of Court and the Bar Standards Council, and also has joint responsibility with the Middle Temple for the maintenance and running of the Temple Church, including the choir. The other matters relating to the Inn's affairs include international relations with overseas legal systems. So just turning then briefly to the governance and duties of governing benches. Bench table orders are the governing rules of the Inn, and they give details about the constitution and election of the bench and senior post holders and committees of financial management and of admission. And the main policies of the Inn, for example, on anti-bribery, equality and diversity, are attached to bench table orders. As set out in the bench table orders, the main duties of a governing bencher are to support the Inn in 3 main ways. The first is to attend at parliaments and bench tables wherever possible, to attend meetings of committees and subcommittees, to which they've been elected, meetings of other bodies which they've been nominated by the Inn, and to assist the Inn in carrying out the education and training functions. In addition, committees and subcommittees and masters of activities are a fundamental component of the governance of the Inn, and they direct the work and activities and policies in their respective areas of responsibility. The Inn's main committees, apart from the Executive Committee, are the Education and Training Committee, the Estates Committee, the Finance Committee, and the Library Committee, but there are others. The main committees of the Inn then report to the Executive Committee, which considers important financial and operational issues that relate to the running of the Inn. And the chairs of the main committees are ex officio members of the Executive Committee, which meets every month, apart from during the summer vacation. So what about bench table? Well, bench table is the name given to the regular, what's effectively a board meeting, of the governing benches of the Inn. And those meetings take place in January, March, May, July, October, and December, and any governing bencher is welcome to attend. A bench table considers issues that are fundamental to the Inn, and in some cases will form what's called a parliament, where key decisions are made, for example, on appointments, including the election of the treasurer and approving the list of students to be called to the bar. But many matters are considered first by Executive Committee before then being forwarded to the bench table or Parliament. In addition to committees, there are also masters of activities who are responsible for particular matters within their title, such as the Master of Mooting, the Master of the Cellar, Master of the Staff, and the House. And in most cases, those masters report directly to the Executive Committee. So how do the committees work? Well, at the end of each year, the reader, who's the incoming treasurer for the following year, considers committee membership in consultation with the treasurer and the reader-elect and the committee chairs. And the objective of an annual review of the membership of committees is to ensure both optimal functionality and also a diverse range of governing benches as far as possible to reflect the Inn's membership and access the best expertise available. And governing benches are asked every year about their committee and activity interests, and the final list of revised committees is subject to approval by bench table before becoming effective for the following year. The chairs of those committees each serve for a 3-year period or longer if they're willing and there's a specific need to be considered in the interests of the Inn. So how might you become involved in the Inn? Well, as a member, you can start by being involved in some of the Inn's education and training functions. You can speak or teach at training events or be on panels for scholarship interviews or become an advocacy trainer. You can also have involvement with the Temple Employed Bar Forum if you're an employed member, or the Temple Women's Forum. You can also suggest activities or organise events such as social context of the law and become involved in those ways. My own involvement in the Inn's activities was started through the Scholarship Committee where I was co-opted. It was highly rewarding seeing new students every year, enabling young people to come to the bar by the grant of money from the Inn. And I've also been involved in the Temple Women's Forum, which is a joint venture with Middle Temple. And over the next year, there'll be a series of events organised with Middle Temple to mark the 100 years of women practising at the bar. So you could be involved in helping with those. That forum is aimed at supporting barristers throughout their careers by providing events which deal with the issues that women face in practice. So thank you for listening to me. As I say, we've got a number of speakers who are going to talk about different aspects of the Inn's committees. And first of all, I'm going to ask Master Ling McCarthy to speak about the education and training.
Thank you very much, and good evening, everybody. My name's Ling McCarthy. I became a bencher of the Inn, I think 2 years ago now. Coincidentally, it was the same year that I also took Silk. I am a member of 11 New Square, which is a small tax set, and I've always had a specialist tax practice. So prior to becoming a bencher, I think I was mainly what you'd call a very willing volunteer with various education and training matters with the Inn. But I didn't really know anything about the structure of the Inn, and I wasn't particularly involved at all with the social side of Inn life. So what was it that I did do? Well, from the earliest date that I was able to, I volunteered to help out with the BARS course scholarship interviews. That was because I was a great believer, and still am, in the Inn's policy of interviewing every applicant without a prior paper sift. But I also recognised that if you think that's a good system, then you jolly well have to help out, because it's not going to be done without a large cohort of people who are willing to do the interviews. Without going into all the reasons why, I'm also a very big believer in the Inn's outreach events. I think that there are many young people out there from non-traditional backgrounds who would benefit from a little support and guidance. And the realization, for example, that the bar is a possible career path if they're motivated and willing to put the work in. Again, if you are going to reach people from non-conventional backgrounds on a large, meaningful scale, then obviously you need a lot of volunteers to deliver that. So throughout the years before becoming a bencher, I've participated variously in pupillage advice evenings, advocacy training days on the Inn Schools project. So that's giving school children in the sixth form a bit of a flavour as to what it's like. So you do a mock plea in mitigation. They get to wear a wig and gown, and they usually really enjoy those days. I also have helped with mock interviews, mentoring, and any other outreach activities over the course of a number of years. As a result, actually, partly of these activities, I've become more interested generally in accessibility to the bar, and had previously been in touch with the Inn about blind or contextual recruitment initiatives. That's one example. I think I probably about 5 or so years ago had various discussions with them about how, for instance, they might be used for pupillage, and that those discussions may also have moved on into whether or not those sorts of initiatives could be useful for scholarships. I hadn't, however, as I mentioned previously, been very involved in the social side of Inn life, I think possibly for a couple of reasons. I did a non-law degree, and I also did bar school part-time. And so whilst I obviously got to know people and made some friends during the qualifying sessions, as a student, I didn't know that many other members of the Inn. I also, as I mentioned, joined a small specialist set of tax chambers, and no one in my chambers was particularly involved in life either. So it wasn't something that I sort of regularly sought out. I also was very involved with the tax profession and a lot of volunteering through that. And so that's sort of where I did most of my professional socializing, if you like. So as a result, I didn't feel that I knew anyone, especially senior members of the Inn, particularly well or socially. I did my volunteering and I left it at that. I hadn't contemplated becoming a bencher at all. I didn't really understand what it involved, and I was under the impression that it was for some more senior members of the Inn. It was simply not something I'd ever thought about or particularly sought out. And it was only purely by chance that shortly after taking Silk, I bumped into Master Treasurer Guy Featherstone Hoare outside Lincoln's Inn, and he subsequently emailed me to ask me whether I'd be interested in being put forward. At the time, he was, I think, reader-elect, and we knew each other from the scholarship interview panels. I knew nothing at all about the process of becoming a bencher at the time, and so I was entirely reliant on being taught through it. Even then, I was very nervous about asking what I perceived to be stupid questions, such as, is it okay for me to approach my other proposers myself? With the benefit of hindsight, I now appreciate that there are no stupid questions. You won't be blackballed or anything of the sort for asking those types of questions. And incidentally, the answer is yes, it's perfectly okay for you to approach your other would-be proposers yourself. There's also no shame if you happen not to be elected in the first year of applying. And I was extremely grateful to the reader-elect for saying that very early on. If you happen not to get elected in year one because there are too many other applicants, you should just throw your hat in the ring again next year until you're successful. Needless to say, that had been my other worry. What happens if you don't get elected first time? Should you wait? Should you apply again? Is it very embarrassing for your proposers? Can you ask them again? All of those questions. As it happens, there weren't too many applicants in my year, so I didn't need to apply again. But now that I'm on the other side of the process, I know that if events had gone differently, I should have been relaxed about it and I should have just applied the next year. I'd also been worried about being able to find 3 proposers, since although I certainly recognised other benches' names from the panels and the outreach days in the past, I didn't know them well, and I think I would have felt very uncomfortable getting in touch completely out of the blue. In the event, getting my other 2 proposers was easy enough. One I knew from the Golf Society and the other I knew professionally from the Chancery Bar Association. I had asked a third person who didn't feel that they could put me forward since they knew me only from outside the inn. And as it happens, I don't myself see that as a bar to proposing someone, provided that you do know them professionally and you find out in advance what they've done in the past for the inn and their intentions for the future. So from my perspective, I'm perfectly happy proposing someone that I know well professionally, even if our paths haven't crossed, for example, on outreach panels, provided that I know that they have volunteered, a lot for the inn in the past, even if it's doing different things from me. But equally, it was perfectly fine that my other would-be proposer felt differently about that. So since having been elected, I've remained involved in pretty much the same areas as before, very much outreach, scholarships, education and training, except sometimes in a different capacity. So for instance, I still mentor, and that carries on much as before. I still sit on the scholarship interview panels, though now mainly as a panel chair rather than a panel member. I still participate in pupillage, advice evenings and other outreach events, sometimes as a panel chair, other times as a panelist. There are 2 aspects, though, that are very new to me, which I do particularly value, and just before I wrap up, just wanted to mention. First, the opportunity to sit on the inn's committees. And so I now feel that I'm able to contribute my thoughts and ideas far more than before. And the best example is participating in a working group that was convened to review whether the scholarship process could be improved from an equality and diversity standpoint. That involved very deep discussions and considerations of things like blind and contextual recruitment, amongst other things. It may be something that Faisel Sadiq picks up in his talk, because he and I sat on the same panel. Secondly, the social aspect. Since my election, I think I've probably been to more in dinners and other social events than in 13 or so prior years combined. This has meant that I've got to know my fellow benchers, but also the inn staff much, much better than I previously had, and forged new friendships that I really and truly value. I actively look forward to going to the inn social events, and becoming a bencher has very much strengthened for me my relationships, not only with the inn in a general sense, but also with other members on an individual level. As with all things, I think you really do get out what you put in. And so for me, this has been something, an experience that I value, continue to contribute to a lot, and really enjoy doing so. And so I'll hand back now to the next speaker.
Thank you very much, Ling. If I can now ask Nicholas Craig to tell you about the Bar Liaison Committee.
Thank you. I'm Nick Craig. I'm a barrister at 3 Verulam Buildings, which is a commercial set. And as regards my involvement with the inn, I've been an advocacy trainer for about the past 10 or 11 years. I've assisted with scholarship interviews for the inn over the past few years, and I was made a bencher last year. But between 2014 and 2020, I was a member of the BLC, or Bar Liaison Committee, which I've been asked particularly to speak about. Now, for those of you that don't know, the BLC is the representative body of members of the inn who have been called to the bar but are not benchers. It is responsible for ensuring that the voice or voices of its members and members of the inn are heard at all levels of governance. Now, you might say, what on earth does that mean? Well, firstly, it means that each member of the BLC sits on one or more of the inn's committees and subcommittees, and also assists a bencher in overseeing other responsibilities such as marshalling, insurance, the garden, or indeed the inn's silver. So, for example, I sat on the Estates Committee and among other things, for a short period, was assigned to assist the bencher responsible for the inn's insurances. Sadly, I was 400 or so years or so late to assist with espionage, which was apparently the lot of those assisting John Thurlow, who was a bencher of Lincoln's Inn, but who was also the Secretary of State for Oliver Cromwell. Now, when I joined the Estates Committee, it was chaired by a Master Treasurer. Subsequently, the baton was passed to Master Stewart, who remains the chair. As you probably know, it's all in the title. With the Estates Committee, one is concerned with the management of the estate of the inn. Revenue from rent is, of course, the primary source of income for the inn. And there are two main considerations at any meeting, and obviously other things discussed as well. But the main considerations are estate management matters, which are generally presented by the inn surveyor, currently Richard Snowden, things like refurbishment of a building or part of a building, progress of works, and obviously a big part of that recently has been the Pegasus project. Also, there tends to be discussions about liaison with the City of London, with, for example, access to Tudor Street. And the second major consideration at any meeting is the so-called financial summary presented by the collector, which includes a report on rent defaulters, which are mercifully generally few. So that's part one of what a member of the BLC does, participates in subcommittee meetings. What else does it do? Well, in terms of ensuring that the voices of its members are heard, the second part is that it will directly consult members of Hall with respect to matters that affect them. Again, by way of example, some of you will remember the survey which took place about 3 years ago now, in 2018, to canvass views on the Pegasus project. Now, this survey was put together by a subcommittee of the BLC on which I sat. And this survey was carried out in advance of the vote of the governing benches on the relevant proposals. Of those that completed the survey, the majority were obviously in favour. And indeed, for those not in favour, the main concern was the effect on the library. And it did give quite a fascinating insight into different people's views about the inn and its purpose. And indeed, what benefit or gain was seen by the Pegasus project itself, which I don't think would have been obtained without that exercise. We prepared a report, the subcommittee, summarising the results of the survey, including the various comments that had been made, and this was then submitted to the executive committee for its consideration. Now, the third part, if you like, of the engagement, or what being a member of the BLC means, is that obviously the members themselves of the committee of the BLC meet about every other month. Now, at those meetings, reports are given about the meetings of the various INS committees, and the representative on those committees will give and speak to the minutes of those various meetings. It receives the most recent report, which is given by the sub-treasurer to the executive committee. It receives an update from the circuits and is very keen to make sure that the circuits are as engaged on the committee and that the views of those not in London are heard and are given due weight. It also discusses any other matters which are regarded as affecting the inn, or more generally the bar, including relevant consultations. By way of example, last year there was, perhaps unsurprisingly, and I think you probably all of you will know, a consultation on the effect of COVID-19 on the civil justice system. And one of the members prepared a report on this, which was discussed at a meeting and then submitted on behalf of the members of Hall. So that is the functional side, if you like, of the BLC. And I must confess that prior to joining it, I didn't have a terribly clear idea of it. But in addition to that functional side came a great opportunity to meet and engage with, firstly, barristers who were not just from the limited sphere of my own practice, a great range of, criminal barristers, for example, who I would never really come across in my day-to-day working life, and along with other areas of practice, as well as individuals employed by the inn who do an incredible amount of silent and work out of sight from anyone, but amazing work for the inn, and it's a huge community of delightful people. So that was the sort of benefit in it as an eye-opener into what the inn did, what the inn does, and how, in a sense, you can be engaged with it in all sorts of different ways. So but also from a personal perspective, being a member of BLC was, first of all, in terms of making an application for to becoming a bencher, a great insight into how the inn operates, and it made me want to be involved in that for the longer term and to be further engaged. And also it allowed me to get to know benchers who were members of the various committees on which I sat sufficiently well enough to be able to ask them whether they'd be prepared to nominate me. Now, as I said, I was appointed as a bencher only last year, since which I think almost my entire life has been conducted by Zoom. And that includes membership and participation in various committees. And I carry on being involved in the governance of the inn to that extent. I've also carried on assisting with education and training, and have conducted various advocacy training, again, sadly online. Hopefully that will soon become more of a personal thing, because again, much of this is engaging with others and hopefully giving back. And in addition, I hope to carry on being involved in scholarships and other such aspects that the inn does. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I hope everybody's building up a picture now of what's available in the inn if you want to be a bencher. So I'm now going to ask Rebecca Dix to speak on behalf of the employed bar.
Thank you very much. I wholeheartedly agree with everything that's gone on before me, in the sense of, the network that you create, the people that you're going to meet. That's just an added bonus of being a bencher and doing all the things that I'm going to mention to you, because I wanted to just talk you through some of those activities that I did and that ended up supporting my application for the bencher application process. Because as you'll probably already know, if you've looked at it, you'll have to provide a CV and application form. And so with that, you'll need to just start to understand what are those kind of things that you want to put on that CV. So for my part, I thought I'd talk through with you the activities that I've done that supported the inn, but in addition to that, all the other activities that I've been doing and that support the profession as well. So not just within the inn, but also outside of that with other committee work and other types of organisations that you can also join. Just to give a little bit of my own background, I'm a criminal law practitioner. I started my career at the self-employed bar at 2 Bedford Row. I was there for about 10 years. And then it came about 2010, I decided to move to the employed bar. It just seemed to be the way that things happened. That wasn't the original plan. I was always very happy at Chambers. I still promote it. I still think it's a great place to be. But for me, it just ended up going that way. My specialism was in corporate crime. So now I'm at the Serious Fraud Office, working as the Associate General Counsel, where again I focus on all of that type of work, which is really fascinating for me. But what it also meant is that I had a bit more time to commit to committees, and that's where I really found there was an opportunity for me to do much more with the inn that I could have done when I was at the self-employed bar. I really take my hat off to everyone who is at the self-employed bar and still managed to make all this time to commit to the committees and to do all the other events, because it is difficult to juggle everything. But the earlier you start to do it, the easier that will become. So I really do encourage people to start doing things now if you're not already, because you'll just start to get used to that, you know, juggling both the work, your personal life, and the extra commitments that you have on top of that. So just to take you through some of the events that I've been doing with the inns, we've already heard about them already, about the outreach events. I really support all of the work that goes in there. There's a huge amount of effort that goes into that in supporting schools and supporting pupils and students. So there is always so much out there to actually volunteer and support the inns on. So do have a look at the website and contact people like Jenny and Wanda who are on this call to find out how you can become more involved in that if you're not already. So I started all of that very early on in my practice. So as soon as I was a pupil, that's when I got back involved with the inns, and that's when I started to do the outreach events. And it kind of just naturally grew from there. So once I moved over to the employed bar, again, I started to understand a bit more about the committees that we've already heard about. The BLC committee, I was on that committee for 3 years, in addition to the Education and Training Committee, and also the Employed Bar Committee. So that was particularly relevant to my area of practice. But the other two committees in particular, as you've heard, they're very active and they cover so much, and they're all really relevant to what we all do. So if you are able to find out who are on the committees, you may find that they're actually not too far removed from your own network. So you could start to speak to them and find out if there are any openings on the committees, if you can be co-opted. And that's one way of trying to get involved into the committee work. For my own personal contribution to those committees, I was able to do a working group paper, one on the employed bar in particular, that was really put together to try and find a way to get more employed barristers at the inns more engaged with the inns. So I found it a very useful topic to get involved in, and obviously it's moved over into the employed bar committee, and that's something that we can continue to improve and implement when we can. And in addition to that, I also did the working group paper with some other members who are now benchers, on the equality and diversity and how we can be better at the inn. And I was really encouraged by that piece of work. It was at the right time, and it meant that the inn did quite a lot on this subject. And again, there are lots of committees already working on that. We do have an equality diversity committee as well. In addition to the committees, I also volunteered to speak at the Temple Women's Forum. Master Reader mentioned about that at the beginning. On that particular event, that was about planned breaks and return to the bar. I really encourage people to be very innovative in how you kind of reach out to the inn, because that was something that I saw advertised, but I could see that there wasn't any reference into the employed bar. It was very much tailored towards the self-employed bar. So I reached out and said, would you be interested in me doing a talk for the employed bar section? So I do encourage people to think about those kind of opportunities, that you may feel that you've got a particular specialism that you can contribute to and actually be a speaker, or maybe arrange another event in the future and just coordinate that with the inn. I think that's a really good way of having some exposure and just giving back to the inn and contributing to the inn and its members. Another area that I've been working on, again for the employed bar, it's for the advocacy training for the employed bar for the new practitioners course that has been set up by Middle Temple. So I've been working with Middle Temple as a volunteer, as a trainer on that course, on the basis that it's a pilot and it's hopefully we can bring it over to the Inner Temple as well. So that's a kind of joint enterprise, I guess, at the moment, trying to bring that over to the Inner Temple, and hopefully we can implement that. So those are the kind of things that I've been doing for the inn. And then separate to that is the other things that I've been getting up to sort of to support the profession itself. So for example, again, I would really recommend just picking committees or areas of work that are relevant to you and you find interesting, because you are going to be committing quite a bit of your time. So do think about areas that you find interesting and are relevant to your work or your personal life. So for me, I joined BACFI, which is the Bar Association of Commerce, Finance and Industry, which again is relevant to my field. But also it was another opportunity to meet other employed barristers, and there are lots of employed barristers who are benchers. So for me, this was the first time that I started to be thinking about becoming a bencher. All the time that I was on the committee for the inns and all the other work that I've done, I've just spoken about, at no point did I ever think about becoming a bencher. It wasn't done for any of those reasons. It was just purely because I was interested and wanted to become more connected to the inn. So BACFI actually issued a newsletter, and they have it on their website at the moment, to just help people understand what is the bencher application process, and they've actually helpfully set out what it is for every inn. So that was really useful, and that would kind of put it on my radar, and it meant that I had people that I could speak to in BACFI to tell me, you know, what is a bencher all about? What does that mean? Could that be me? How do you go about it? And that started the discussion. And that's when I started to look at the application. And then I was pleased to see that, you know, the application, whilst you have to show your commitment to the profession and your own specialism and be an expert in your field and all of that kind of stuff, but it's also really important to show all those other things that you're doing for the inn itself. And I had realised that actually all the things I've been doing for so many years would now be really useful for my application. So that was really helpful, and that's really what started me thinking about becoming a bencher. And the other committees that I've joined, just for reference, if anyone else is interested, these are not necessarily just for the employed bar. So the Female Fraud Forum, they have their own committee there as well. There are plenty of mentoring programs, again, with the inn or with other committees. I personally do this with the BACFI committee. And then we've got the Bar Council Wellbeing Committee, which is another committee that I'm a member of. And I, again, represent there the employed bar. So there's plenty out there. It's just a matter of finding what you find to be the most interesting and that you're willing to, you know, commit your time to. You get so much out of it, as already been said. You know, what you put in is what you get out of it. And I personally find it really interesting. I love meeting new people, and like you say, Master Craig, I haven't yet met many people in person, as I was a bencher. I only became a bencher last year too, so I'm really looking forward to when we can all meet up and enjoy that social side of it, which I can hear about. So that's everything from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. I'm now going to turn to the circuits, and we have a representative from the circuits today. We have Master Anne Richardson from the North Eastern Circuit. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I've been a barrister since 1986, and I have practiced in Newcastle for the whole of my working life in the same chambers, although its name has changed several times over the years. It's called Dere Street Barristers now, and I'm a criminal barrister specialising in sex and historical abuse cases. I'm going to start with a brief outline of my interaction within a temple before I became a bencher. So as you can probably hear, I'm a lass from Newcastle. I became a bar student in the days of the Council for Legal Education, where everybody did their finals in London. When I went to live in London, I knew only one other person, and even then she was a very slight acquaintance. And I decided to join Inner Temple out of all the inns for the disgraceful reason that I had done a mini pupillage with a criminal barrister in Newcastle and fell madly in love with him. He was an Inner Templar, and I thought if I joined the same inn, we would have weekends in London. Now, almost 40 years later, we laugh about this ludicrous absurdity. Needless to say, it did not happen. But what did happen was it introduced me to an inn that was friendly, it was vibrant, it had the most wonderful dinners. Lunch then was partaken in Niblet Hall with fellow student members, drinks in the Pegasus Bar, and almost all my friends gathered over that time were from Inner Temple. When I was called to the bar, the ceremony took place in the dining hall, but then, unlike now, my parents were up in the Minstrels Gallery while I was downstairs stuffing my face. And then I left London to take a pupillage in Newcastle and then a tenancy, and I didn't give Inner Temple a second thought, except perhaps for a couple of trips to the big city with my husband and friends to go to the Temple Ball, dancing to Kenny Ball and his jazz man, or the Pasadena Roof Orchestra, which probably tells you how long ago that was. And my life in London seemed very remote. As my friends who'd been called to the bar with me drifted away either from the profession or went into very high-flying commercial sets in London, my trips to the inn they could be counted on the cloven hooves of a sheep. And that changed in about 2008 or 9, when I was appearing before a senior judicial member of the inn, who, while still sitting on the bench in court, asked me whether I was free the following weekend to come to Northampton. Now, I presumed he wasn't just bantering with me, and I agreed, and so began what had been a privilege and a pleasure of being a group leader at student events for Inner Temple at Highgate House. And having done that a few times over the next few years, I then began to come to London more to entertain people there and also to attend the yearly dinner, which the inn gives very generously to those people like myself who've contributed to the weekends. And so through those weekends and the dinners, I got to know senior members of the inn, and I was struck by the fact that everyone was so friendly and approachable, and there was no real difference between barristers and the judiciary. I must say that when I became a bencher, I then went back with a fellow bencher to have lunch in the same dining hall. We were like two small children, as neither of us had been back there since students, and we couldn't quite believe that we were now allowed to sit at the top table behind the roped off area. The inn kindly invites new benchers to come to London for a dinner to celebrate, and again, the warm welcome I received there was unbelievable. I never dreamed that I would be called master and have my own peg in hall all those years ago when my parents were watching me being called in the Minstrels Gallery. I also attended any Inner Temple event on circuit before I became a bencher, and I was asked to mentor students on the North Eastern Circuit for the inn, as well as being asked to speak at outreach events and explaining to students my own journey to the bar. And the weekends in Northampton, as I've indicated, were organised and run by the Northern and North Eastern circuits, the ones that I attended. And the latter is, of course, my own circuit. And I was asked by a governing bencher of the inn, who is now a judicial bencher, whether or not I'd ever thought of becoming a bencher myself. I was flattered, but flabbergasted, as I didn't think it was something that a junior barrister, albeit one who even then was pretty decrepit, could aspire to. Also, given one needs 3 sponsors to become a governing bencher, I didn't think there'd be 3 governing benchers who even knew me. I was lucky in that each year there are a limited number of nominees who are able to be made benchers, subject of course to bench table approval, without it going to a vote. And this allows folk like me, who may not be that well known amongst other benchers, to stand a chance of joining their ranks. And I've also been impressed how even before the advent of Zoom meetings due to COVID, the inn makes a huge effort to include those who don't live in travelling distance of cities such as London, in their meetings, we used to dial in and be on speakerphone, although of course it's now much nicer to see everyone in Zoom. The only downside being that when the London members of the committees I'm on are able to meet in person, they generally either have booze or bacon sandwiches together, and of course on Zoom I can't do that. The benefits to me of being a bencher have been surprising and extremely rewarding. Now, as a governing bencher, I have the immense privilege of being able to call students to the bar each year. The BTPC at Northumbria has a very close link to Inner Temple, and it fills me with pride to see so many young people from Northumbria being called, a lot of them by me as I bob up and down like a yo-yo in Temple Church. But giving something back to the inn and allowing those just starting their journey to be able to ask questions of someone who must seem to them almost at the end of hers is very rewarding. And it reminds me of why I still do this job, because enthusiasm is infectious and I'm extremely lucky to be a criminal barrister. I'm a member of the Outreach Committee, the Qualifying Sessions Committee and the Bencher Nomination Committee. And it will not have passed you by that the latter means that I'm likely to be one of those who considers your application if you do decide to apply. In the other committees I'm on, I help plan ways in which we can remain relevant to those hoping for a career at the bar, but also those who are studying or working both in London and within the circuits. And there can be few more rewarding experiences than watching the light in a student or a pupil's eyes when they realise that barristers are not the remote alien beings they thought, and that you don't need a double-barrelled surname with titled parents and a private trust fund to come to the bar. Qualifying sessions have just undergone a huge transformation, which means they're now conducted on a much more formal footing, and therefore we are reliant on members of the inn giving up their time to conduct such sessions. And if you are interested in becoming a bencher, then perhaps offering your services to conduct a lecture on your area of expertise as part of a qualifying session would be a great start to raise your profile within the inn. I'm also Assistant Master of the North Eastern Circuit. Now, what is a Master or Assistant Master of a circuit? It was about 3 years ago, it was decided to have a more formalised arrangements within the circuit. So there was a single point of contact for the inn when wanting to contact a circuiteer. And in fact, it's a double point of contact because we have a master. In my circuit, it's Master Neil Clark, and I am the assistant master. And we help the inn to organise social events on circuit. Although it has to be said, these have been severely curtailed due to the pandemic. But as anyone who's been to the Northeast will know, or anyone who saw the news on Monday, Geordies like to party, and no doubt that will happen again. And again, these events help to foster the relationship between the bench and the bar and the students, and they're often coupled or aligned to something to do with CPD points. So I thoroughly recommend becoming a bencher. I'm very proud of the inn. It's not only a beautiful place, but it's a friendly place. And I think Inner Temple is an inn that puts diversity and outreach at the heart of all its programs and events. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Anne. You certainly make being on circuit sound really far more fun than being in London. But the inn's very keen to maintain contact and to organise events which are happening on circuit, and we're very grateful to our circuit benchers like Anne for organising that. So if I can finally turn to Master Sadiq, Faisel Sadiq, to talk about EDI. Faisel.
Good afternoon. Before I come on to EDI, just tell you a little about my background, because that will then possibly explain why I'm so excited about the work the inn is doing in terms of EDI. I'm a property practitioner at Hardwicke. I am, both my parents are immigrants, Indian descent, working class. My mother was a waitress and later a school cook when I was a a student at university. She doesn't still quite know what I do, except being a barrister is very important. And I still get the once a month text message as she's speaking to a friend of hers to ask me, can you just explain why you're a bench at Temple and why is this important again? Anyway, first time I came to Dining Hall, I was completely thrown. I went to University of London. I'd never seen anything like dining in a hall before, was thrown by the little trowel at the side of my dinner plate, and people were utterly lovely and charming in explaining to me what that was. But called in 2000, I probably couldn't have come to the bar but for the scholarship I got from the inn. And I remember as a student being incredibly touched by quite how kind and helpful people were. And when I explained my background, people were always very, very accepting. Anyway, 2002, I'm asked to attend an outreach event by the Education Training Department. I went. I was then invited to get involved in mock interviews, mentoring, the Junior Bar Association, and subsequently became a interviewer for scholarships interview scheme, and then an advocacy trainer for the inn. A friend of mine noted that in interview, the elections for the Bar Liaison Committee said, look, you're quite involved in the work of the inn. You're very keen to ensure that the inn becomes as inclusive as is possible. Have you thought of putting yourself forward? So I put myself forward, was elected to the BLC in 2010. And that for me really changed how I viewed the inn and made it clear to me that at some point I wanted to think about becoming a bencher. I was elected in July 2018. Again, friends of mine I met through scholarship interviews and advocacy training suggested I should put myself forward. Now, if I pause there and go back to the process by what it is about what I saw on the BLC that made me think, yeah, I want to be a bencher. I, for a long time until I was on the BLC, felt quite uncomfortable when I'd come to inn events. Imposter syndrome run rampant. Not only am I from an ethnic minority background, but working class, felt a little bit fish out of water. On BLC, I found, on the BLC, I was co-opted onto one of the inn committees, in this case, the scholarships committee. I got a real sense of exactly what the inn does, both its determination to level the playing field, to help our students from whatever their background succeed, desire to ensure that we use our scholarships program to level the playing field and allow the most exceptional students at the inn get ahead. I was absolutely hooked. I went to the scholarships committee. I think at the time it was chaired by Master Reader. And what was, possibly Master Reader will not remember it quite as fondly, but what I found quite, what I really enjoyed about going to the scholarships committee meetings is I have a particular axe to grind. How do we make everything we do fairer? And at points, I can be quite strident in setting out my views, and I will often completely forget that I'm speaking to a judge of the Supreme Court, or I'm speaking to a judge of the Court of Appeal, or I'm speaking to a Crown Court judge, and I will be very, very, this is what I think, this is why I think what we're doing needs to be improved, and this is why I disagree with what you are saying. What I found brilliant was that everyone I've met at the inn really is entirely unstuffy. Everyone just wants to focus on how do we get to the right end result. And that no one, certainly it struck me when I went to the scholarships committee and in the years since, stands on ceremony. It's quite funny because albeit at committee meetings, we will refer to one another as master this, master that. Frankly, it has a feel to a much greater extent of a group of friends, a group of colleagues, having a discussion with a view to trying to find the best outcome. When you apply to become a bencher, you do need to be able to demonstrate a track record that you've done stuff for the inn. The reason for that is a number of people I've spoken to have approached me. Really, the thinking is, I want to apply to take silk, I want to apply to take for a judicial appointment. I think being a bencher will be very helpful for me. I've not done anything for the inn. I'm probably not going to do a great deal. What's the bare minimum I can get away with? Now, what we really want, there's a cap in terms of the number of people that can be benchers. What we really want are people that want to contribute, want to really immerse themselves in the life of the inn. If you cannot demonstrate that you've got a track record, I think it may be, especially for a practitioner in London, my view is it may be that little bit more difficult to become a bencher, because really, if we're looking for people that will contribute in the future, some evidence that you've done so in the past is helpful. In my case, because I'd been doing scholarship interviews since 2008, advocacy trainer since 2007, and I knew quite a few people from doing that, I think it was an easier case to make. Since my election, I've served on the Education and Training Committee, Quality, Diversity and Inclusivity Committee, and the Scholarships Committee. And as I said before, what I haven't mentioned is I'm one of the vice chairs of the Bar Council's Equality, Diversity and Social Mobility Committee. So the particular axe I have to grind is, how does the inn do better? The Equality, Diversity and Inclusivity Committee really has quite a wide-ranging brief to look at what the inn is doing. How do we do it better? And so, for example, at the moment, we're going through a process. We realize that we need to have better training for benchers and volunteers in terms of ED&I. And given that, our committee is looking at revising that training. And it's fantastic to be on the ground floor in terms of dealing with that. Many of you who may be involved in pupillage applications in your own chambers may be aware of the discussions that I had in terms of blind marking, having regard to contextual data. If we're looking at potential, how are we going to measure that in terms of scholarships? How do we effectively level the playing field? I remember when this discussion was first raised at the ED&I subcommittee and then subsequently in the scholarships committee, a degree of apprehension. How will the establishment view this discussion? And again, I feel rather badly having had those sorts of thoughts, because as soon as these issues were raised, the general consensus was, yeah, these are issues we need to look into. Again, how do we do better? Ling, McCarthy and I, with some other benchers and other members of the BLC, were tasked with forming a working group to look at how that could be, how we could improve. We delivered a report, and the inn is beginning to take steps to implement. So from my point of view, given my particular axe to grind is inclusivity, I'm not only do I think that the inn is working very hard to become much more inclusive, but my role as a bencher has allowed me to advance that agenda, and I've found lots of there's a lot of goodwill, a desire to advance the agenda amongst fellow benchers. The other thing I would say is, in terms of the social aspect of becoming a bencher, I did not anticipate quite how great the opportunities were for enhancing one's social life through being a bencher. The number of dinners that I now go to, the frequency with which I go and dine in hall. And one, it's nice getting to know people. Two, it's nice getting to know people who aren't in chambers. I wanted to have a discussion about potentially moving chambers last January. I'm a property practitioner. The obvious difficulty I have is I don't know very many of members of the property bar outside of chambers, but you don't want to have that conversation in chambers. And again, you know, I find myself in hall sitting next to Master Treasurer Guy Featherstone Hall, able to pick his brains. And at social events, I may find myself sitting next to Court of Appeal judge, and I will learn all sorts of things about the life of a Court of Appeal judge I had never thought of. So there's a lot of social outlets. It's a lot of fun, and you get to meet people that you might not ordinarily have met if you were not a bencher of the inn. The other thing I would say is, as I was writing this up, my wife is also a bencher of the inn. She got in a year ahead of me. She absolutely hates sitting on committees. And when I showed her my rough crib, she said, "You do understand, if I listened to your crib, I would never have put myself forward to be a bencher." So I'm very dull. I love being on committees. My wife cannot stand being on committees, but loves being a bencher. She not only is continuing to do her work in advocacy, scholarships and outreach, but because she's a bencher, she feels much more invested in it. Ultimately, benchers are the governing body of the inn. It is to a much more real extent, it is our inn. She's able to input in, influence in policies without being on committees. She's, I think this year, Master of the Yearbook. So the membership of committees is not the only way of contributing, but the key point is being a governing bencher is an opportunity to contribute to the life of the inn, one I've really enjoyed and I'd heartily recommend you think about.
Well, thank you very much, Faisel. I do remember fondly meeting you for the first time in the Scholarships Committee, and I think you rather underplay your fantastic contribution, particularly in relation to the analysis of some of the statistics which have led to some of the progress that we've made in the inn in relation to diversity, and your contribution was very welcome. So before we move on to the Q&A, you will see that there is a Q&A function for questions, and the thumbs up button is there to prioritise a question that attendees would like answered. So just one or two words before we move on to the Q&A. Firstly, although we've had the effects of the pandemic, the work of the inn has gone on, very ably supported and facilitated by the inn staff and the sub-treasurer, for which we're very grateful. Everything has been by Zoom, and we've had a lot of work, and they've had particularly a lot of work, particularly with the Project Pegasus. But we're hoping that over the next year, we're going to gradually get back to some of the inn's social activities, which form part of the fellowship that we have as benchers and also with the members of the inn. Also, I'd just like to mention in relation to the nomination process, the full details are available if you would like to look at them. There's a process at present underway. Most people would find that there's no difficulty in finding 3 nominations to be a bencher. And one of the things that it gives you is that if you are elected a bencher, you automatically have 3 people who are there to help you and to make you feel welcome when you go to benchers events for the first time. So now I'm going to ask if there is any, are there any questions? You can put them on the Q&A function on the Zoom. I'm not seeing any questions. So there's a question as to whether, as to more details about the vacancies on the various committees. Perhaps we could just discuss that in a bit more detail. Maybe the panel would like to show their faces, as it were, and we can all make any contribution that we can in relation to the questions which are asked. As far as the committees are concerned, the Bar Liaison Committee is probably the easiest committee to think about when you're at the bar. And perhaps Nicholas Craig can just give a bit more detail about how you would get onto a vacancy on that committee. But generally speaking, as I said earlier, at the end of the year, the committee chairs meet and put forward names of those who are on the committee, and the treasurer and the reader-elect consider any further suggestions that have been made, and then benchers themselves are asked about their interests and whether they want to be on the committee. But as far as members of the Inn are concerned, some are co-opted because they have a particular expertise or an interest in an area. And if you want to make your interest known, such as I think that both Ling and Faisel have mentioned how they became involved, and also Rebecca from the employed bar, that it may be that your name would go forward and the chairs will be interested in having co-opted members of the committee. Does anybody want to add anything to what I've just said?
Just with respect to the BLC, there are elections every 3 years to become a member of the BLC. And in fact, last year, I think it was 2020 in the autumn, was the last time that people sought to be elected. Normally, they run for 3 years. So you're on the BLC for 3 years, and you can run up to 2 terms. So in other words, a total of 6 years. Thereafter, you can be, and a lot of people generally are co-opted. I think it's fair to say that there are never enough people applying to become members of the BLC to fill the committee. So at least at the moment, my understanding is there's always space.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Anyone else want to add anything to what Nicholas has just said? No. Thank you. Well, I'll move on to the next question, which is, are committee meetings always at 5 o'clock on a weekday, and how are members' commitments taken into account in scheduling them? Well, generally speaking, they are at about 5 o'clock, some are at 6 o'clock, but it's really after court hours. And obviously the impetus is to try and get as many people there as possible, and if you're a member of a committee, for you to attend. But obviously if you have any commitments, you can notify in advance your lack of availability. But committee meetings have to be scheduled and put into the diary quite well in advance, and it's hoped that committee members will attend and to try and modify their other commitments to attend the committees for which they are members. Anyone else want to add anything? Yes, Anne.
Yes, as I said in my brief talk, I think I've only been once to a committee meeting in person, because obviously living in Durham and working in Newcastle, all the meetings are in London. And so the Inn really tries very hard to make sure that you can attend over a link or via Zoom. And that will continue even when the lockdown procedures have finished. So, and you can also attend late if you really have a commitment that you can't get out of, or you're later from court. Quite often, I will come into a meeting that's already halfway done. And of course, these aren't weekly meetings, so it's not as if you have to give up a space each week or even each month. They're generally speaking 2 or 3 times a year.
Thank you. Ling, I think you were trying to speak as well.
Yes, I was just going to add, you do get very advanced notice. So I think that the dates for the 4 committee meetings of one of the committees I had, pretty much you receive at the start of the relevant year. The other point to make is a lot of the work, the actual doing of the work, actually takes place outside the committee meetings anyway. So even if you can't attend every single meeting, there are very good agendas, very good minutes. And a lot of the work that the committee does is done outside of that single hour in the quarter. So even if you can't make every single meeting, you can still actually make a very valuable contribution to that committee, depending on the work the committee is doing at any moment in time. There are also working groups that are sometimes set up for specific projects. So as mentioned, Faisel and I were on a working group concerned with scholarships, and that was a group which I think had 5 or 6 members in total. And so we very much agreed the dates between ourselves to accommodate everybody's availability. And on a smaller scale, that works very well.
Thank you. I did say that most of the meetings were at 5 or 6, but we do sometimes have meetings at 8:30 in the morning. So again, outside court hours, if that's the way that the committee works best. Also, just picking up on what Anne Richardson has said, one of the advantages that we've discovered over the last year is how much better it is to be able to meet by Zoom. And I think that moves us into the next question, which is from Claire Simpson about being based in Brussels. The first thing is that if you're based in Brussels, you may be an overseas bencher, which is a different type of bencher, and wouldn't be a governing bencher of the inn, still give you different rights and entitlements as a bencher. But you'll be able to potentially contribute to the inn by Zoom, wouldn't have to attend in person, particularly now that we've all discovered how much easier it is if we're far from each other to keep in touch. Just dealing with the next question, which is from David Temkin, and perhaps you can help with this, Anne Richardson. This is about the being a member of the Northern Circuit and the limit to how many circuit benches are permitted. The Sub-Treasurer will correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there's any limit on the number of circuit benches overall. But there is potential for a number of circuit benches to be elected per year without going through the usual election process. Perhaps you can just deal with that, Anne.
Yes, that's right. That's how I became a bencher, as I said, that because circuiteers are perhaps unlikely or less likely than those who are in London and can pop into the inn more readily to know a number of governing benches, then there is a procedure by which circuit benches or prospective circuit benches can simply be nominated without being voted on. But I don't think that there is a limit to that. I seem to have in mind, and Greg will tell me otherwise, I seem to have in mind 2 or 3, but I don't think that that's an upper limit.
It's up to 3 a year who can go through without being part of an election process, but there is no upper limit. But perhaps I could just, on the previous question, mention that Master Zatzler, who is based in Luxembourg, is an active member of the International Committee. So it is possible, I'm sure, to operate from Brussels as well as a bencher.
Thank you. The next question is from Tina Clapham. It's a question for Rebecca about the areas that employed barristers could help with, saying that she currently helps with scholarship interviews, but as a government lawyer with no recent advocacy experience, not sure what help she could give to students.
Yeah, well, first of all, when I mentioned before about the new practitioners course, it's advocacy, but it's advocacy as we know it, which is more to do with board level, conducting meetings, presenting to the ministers, a briefing to ministers. So that course is specifically designed for employed barristers. So it's not about going into court every day and all of that kind of thing. So that is something I would really recommend that you get involved with if that's something that you find interesting. And at the moment, that's Middle Temple that are organising that. But the plan is to bring that over to the Inner Temple. So that should happen hopefully soon. I'll keep an eye on that. But if in the meantime you want to get involved on there, so that the programme is then mirrored at Inner Temple, so you would have done already the reading and understanding how the course is actually conducted. So I would really recommend doing that. As I said, look at BACFI, which is the Bar Association of Commerce, Finance and Industry. We have a working group there that is dedicated to our respective inns. So we keep in touch and make sure we draw together all the different things that our inns are doing, so that we can try as best we can to make it a one applies to everyone approach, so that whatever Greys are doing, whatever Middle are doing, Inner can also do the same thing. So do reach out to that committee. I really recommend it. There are also speaking events. I mentioned earlier about the Temple Women's Forum, and there will be lots of other forums as well that you can volunteer to become a speaker, and always just progressing and trying to educate everyone about the employed bar and just understanding the differences between the two, and that there are not as many differences. We may not go to court every day, but there's still a lot there to bring us together and to try to advocate as one bar, which is what I do quite a bit. If you want to ask any other questions following on from this, I'm more than happy to speak to you separately.
Thank you, Rebecca. Of course, we also have the Employed Barristers Forum, which deals with issues specifically for the employed bar. I think you have a one bar approach to that within the Inn. Anyone else that wants to add to that, their own experience? Yes, Faisel.
I was just going to say, I mean, for a while I was an employed barrister, and what it's worth bearing in mind is not just the fact that it isn't just advocacy training that the Inn is providing to students. There's the opportunity to assist at outreach events. There's the opportunity to mentor. And there are a number of students I've met over the last few years who are actually undertaking pupillage through the employed bar. And I suspect we don't have enough mentors to help people who are looking for those sorts of pupillage or want advice and assistance through it. But it's also do bear in mind that the Inn, while we're an education institution, we have committees that have other focuses. So for example, the library committee, the estates committee, there's important work that needs to be done at the Inn that even if you're not going into court day in, day out, you will be able to contribute if you wanted.
There's also a proposal which has been put forward by the reader-elect that those wishing to be involved in committees may have the opportunity to observe a committee in operation. So that will be available to people through the Treasury Office if they wanted to consider that as an option. Can I then move on to how well does a bencher have to know a candidate before they can nominate them? What the nomination should include is, generally speaking, the bencher saying that they know that the potential bencher is someone who would make a contribution to the Inn. And sometimes that is from their own experience of them on committees. And I have to say I was proud to sponsor Faisel's nomination, having been on the scholarships committee with him. Also, if somebody knows you in your field of practice, who's also a bencher, and is also able to say that you would be prepared to make your contribution to the Inn and a suitable person to be a bencher, then that would be sufficient. But perhaps anybody else would like to contribute from their own experience. I was, I have to say, disappointed when Ling said that someone had said that they couldn't be a nominator because they didn't know you from the Inn. I don't think that's strictly necessary, but you would have had to have made a contribution in some way to the Inn and shown a commitment to being a bencher and to the work of the Inn. Ling.
And I think just picking up on that, from that, if I was, or when I've been asked to nominate people, that I see as being something that from my perspective is more important. Having evidence of their track record, whether I was there to witness it myself or not, and whether I know them simply professionally as opposed to throughout the Inn, you know, that would really for me be, I think, the criteria that would make me feel comfortable and feel it appropriate to nominate someone, rather than necessarily I've known someone for X many years, say, or in a specific capacity.
Yes, thank you. Just in relation to the question by Paula Safowa about being an employed barrister and taking a career break, there is a guide to volunteering opportunities. I think that's just been posted on the website, and also I think a link was provided just earlier in this webinar by Wanda. To look at what you can do to volunteer. And I think it's probably a good idea to try and build up a little bit of a track record before applying to be a bencher in due course. But if you're able to volunteer for anything and are willing to do so, that would be very welcome. Any other questions?
I'll just say something about finding the three benches. For my own part, when as you know, I didn't really think about becoming a bencher all the time. I was on the committee. I just kind of went along with it and thought it was a great opportunity to be part of. So when it came to actually doing the bencher application and I realised I needed to find 3 sponsors, I literally got the book, the yearbook, and flicked at the back and read through all of the governing benches to see who I knew. And I don't know if that rings bells to anybody else, but that's how I approached it. And you may find that you actually do know some, because I think you'll find, when I was, in chambers or meeting people, I don't tend to ask them what inn are you in unless we're all together at the inns and I know that they're a member of this inn. Otherwise, I really didn't know who was actually a member of Inner Temple. So that's how I did it, and that's how I found the names. But had I known when I was going to the committees that my plan was to become a bencher, that's the time that you should really try to think about who would you ask as a sponsor, rather than doing it the other way around, which wasn't necessarily the best way. But that's that's when you start to use the committees and all the other work that you do to start to finding people that you think you could approach. So you may not know somebody now, but all the things that you end up doing and contributing, you'll find somebody to help you.
Yes, and I think Jenny's just posted the list of benches that it's on the website. And so you could take Rebecca's approach just to find out whether there is anybody who could support you if you've not met someone through committees. But I think generally speaking, if you've been volunteering and have been putting in your contribution to the inn, people will be very willing to support you. Yes, anything else?
I should probably just add on in relation to I don't know what the career break was for, if it's the same topic or not, but we did a working group paper for the BLC as well on parental leave, and we wanted to address whether or not, if you're on parental leave, because you have to attend the committees so many times, that if you're on leave you wouldn't be able to complete that. So we did do a paper on this to address that issue, and that you are given that time off for however long you take off, up to the 12 months. It's up to you whether you are able to still come to those committee meetings, but you are given that time off if you want to take that time off. And so just to say that for anybody who was thinking about taking parental leave while you're committed to these committees.
Thank you. Well, I think we're coming towards the end now, unless anybody has any further questions. And I hope that all the contributions that have been made by the benches you've heard from this evening have fired your intentions and inspired you to think about becoming a bencher. It really is very satisfying to do something which you enjoy, and you can choose what you have in mind. If you're interested in diversity, if you're interested in outreach, if you're interested in estates, if you're interested in finance, all of that is available to you if you become a bencher, to be on a committee of that kind. And I'd also just say that the staff are incredibly supportive in the process and will help you through it if you're considering making an application. I'd also advise anybody who is on the circuits to contact their master of the circuits or deputy master of the circuits to see what the process is and to consider applying to a bench from the circuits. It is something that we are very keen to encourage. And as I say, this year has meant that we've been more in touch perhaps than in previous years. And I know that Anne, for example, has attended some of the meetings from her car, driving back from court on hands-free, I'm sure. But it does give an indication of how possible it is to make your contribution from outside the inn. But we hope that we will be back very shortly in our new refurbished premises with our excellent education and training facilities, which will provide more opportunities for people to volunteer and take part in the core functions of the inn. So if there are no further questions, I'd like to thank everyone for taking part, and for anybody who's been watching, come and join us. Thank you.